So welcome to our webinar, a smart consulting sourcing webinar. Today we're going to talk about partnering with your consulting suppliers. So today we are three. We usually are only, it might be bigger, right? So today we're the three of us. So there's myself, Mark, and Laurent. So today we're going to talk about how to partner with your consulting suppliers. It's all about relationship, building the trust with your suppliers, and how procurement can really bring some value to that relationship. And so I will introduce the speakers, starting with Mark. Mark, can you introduce yourself briefly, please, to our audience?
Gladly. Yes, so I'm a partner with Epic Pivot. And just so you know, Helene, the echo was still there, so may want to address that. But yes, Epic Pivot is an insight, innovation, strategy, and transformation. And what we do is we help clients make Epic Pivot, leveraging their assets to move in new directions. Am I the only one who hears an echo?
No, that's good.
No, I think there is an echo on Mark's side, and it's breaking up on my end when I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
It might just be the speaker coming through your side.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Laurent, can you introduce yourself? Laurent?
Sorry for this. We are fixing it.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yes. We have it.
Laurent?
Okay.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah. So can you now introduce yourself?
Session if we cannot hear each other. We are just three. So we're lucky. The three of us. Okay. Well, my name is Laurent Thomas. I'm one of the founders of Consulting Quest, and I've been spending my career significantly in consulting, with about 15 years over there, followed by 10 years in operations with Solvay, the chemical company. And I recently rejoined the Consulting Quest that we had founded with Hélène to lead the development of
I am Hélène Lafitte. I'm the CEO of Consulting Quest, and as you may know, I'm a consulting sourcing thought leader. We also wrote a book with Laurent. If you're interested in our writings, you can just send me an email, as the email is here, and I'll send you gladly the ebook that we wrote. So today, let's move forward. What are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about relationship with suppliers. We'll start with why those relationships matter. We'll talk also about the common pitfalls in those relationships. And after that, we'll move to the consultant perspective to not have a one-sided perspective on it, and we'll all then move on to managing a panel of providers, and we'll talk about managing the performance. That'd be the program for today. So let's move on, shall we? Let's get started. So the first topic that we want to talk about is, what do these relationships matter? Why is it important to build relationship with consultants? So why do relationships hold such significance in consulting, and how do they impact the overall success of an engagement? I think, Mark, that you're the best person to answer that question. Yep. I would say.
Helene, would you like me to respond? Okay. Glad to do so. So relationships are critical in consulting. There's a shortcut to finding the right person to help you for your specific need. And so the best consultants have context to solve the problem. And so you can either educate your consultant and build trust slowly over time when you introduce a new consultant. But if you already have a relationship, it's a shortcut. You don't have to build that trust, and you don't have to explain the context of the situation. So what it does is it saves you time, and it enables you to move forward more quickly. And so that's one of the main reasons why consultants differentiate by industry and by specialty. So you don't have to build those relationships. But the other thing to keep in mind is it depends on the type of project that you're really focusing on. Is it an industry-specific consulting engagement, or is it a functional expertise consulting engagement? People generally have more patience for new relationships if the subject matter of the consulting scope is not industry. So just a couple of thoughts to keep in mind. But yeah, relationships are critical both for the client and the consultant.
So yeah, I think that's an important point to say that it's important for both sides of both clients and procurement. So you both, Laurent, you were also a former consultant. So and of course Mark is still a consultant. So I'd like you guys to think about an anecdote from your experience where that relationship dynamics greatly influence the trajectory of a consulting engagement. Laurent, maybe you could start with this one.
So I agree. I fully agree with what Mark just said, and there might be some situations where the relationship is of lesser importance when it's more kind of a study and recommend situation where you have more transactional relationship. But even though you need a relationship to be briefed properly at the beginning, but as soon as there is a change dimension and there are a lot of people interaction, then a relationship becomes super important. If I look back at my experience, the most striking experience probably I have is during my time with Delta Consulting. That was, as per its name, working a lot on change for a very large organization. Most senior partners were working as trusted advisors to CEOs of Fortune 500 or CAC 40 in France. They were attending most of the management meetings and debriefing afterwards with the CEO, facilitating the dynamics within the management team. Okay. Okay. So Elena to leave the room. Okay. So the relationship with the CEO and the executive team was based on trust. And to illustrate that, and this is what was making things working very well, because he was able to tell things to the CEO that nobody else in the executive team could tell, because they were banking their future on the relationship with the CEO, and they were not telling everything. They were also the executives were telling things to David, that was the partner in charge of this at the time, that they were not maybe telling to each other or telling to the CEO, and this was really a relationship-based transformation. The one sentence I took away was a testimony in a video that we had made, where one of the executives was saying, "I cannot say exactly what David is doing, but when he's with us, we work better." And I think it illustrates pretty well why the relationship was so important.
Yeah, so we work in both project fashion and as well as an ongoing consulting resource for several clients on a retainer relationship. And so, as I think about trust and relationship, we obviously have deeper relationships with the retainer-based clients that we have. But the project ones come back over and over again. They just have intermittent needs for us. Really, the key thing to keep in mind is the relationship expands over time naturally. I think the knock on consultants is you land and expand. You try to get in there, and then you ultimately have more services, and then also costing the client more money. But what ultimately happens is that you find things out through the course of a consulting engagement where there's additional services needed, and there's additional scope required to solve the problem. And you don't know that at the beginning as a consultant. And so the relationship is there because it's a give and take. If it's a one-sided relationship, then it's not going to work. It's really a symbiotic relationship. The client is constantly finding out new information, and the consultant is helping them solve the problem and bringing in potentially other resources to bear.
Yes.
If it's out of the field of expertise.
So that's very interesting, because we see that the relationship can get you a little bit beyond what is really the project about. It can help smooth the process. It can help increase the value that is created just because you're creating that great relationship with the clients in general and the teams. So I think that's a very important point. And when we launch a consulting project, we're all about creating value, and that's also something that is very important. So now we can look at, okay, so there's an interest in building those relationships, and it has an impact on the projects. Indeed, I think that we can all agree on that. So now, what are the common pitfalls that come with that relationship with your consulting suppliers? So the first thing that we wanted to touch upon was that actually we talked a lot about the relationship between clients and consultant, which is probably the most important. It's true because that's about the project, but actually there is someone else in the relationship, and that someone else on top is procurement, and that each one of the member of that triangle, that's the consultant, the buyer, and the stakeholder being the client, the buyer, procurement, and consultant. Each of them have different roles and expectations. But the consultant is here, they are bringing their expertise and what they want, and we illustrated that very clearly. They want to build that relationship and that trust with their client, because that's how you really deliver high value. The client, they're looking for relationship with the consultant a little bit for the same reasons, and there comes in the procurement people who want to build relationship with, or should build relationship with, the stakeholders, so they understand their needs, and then they can anticipate, and they can bring value, and they can find the right people to talk to. And they should also build a relationship with the consultant, because that's how you make those relationships last longer, go over the personal connections between the consultant and the stakeholders that are very linked to those persons indeed. And you know that in the consulting world, turnover and tenure are high and tenure are short. And so if the risk that you're taking, if you only base your relationship on that consultant and stakeholder relationship, then the risk you're taking is that when the stakeholder is leaving the company or changing role, or when the consultant is changing company, then the relationship is lost with that consulting firm. And that can be an issue, especially if that specific consulting firm has an expertise that is unique and very strategic for you. So there is an importance in building a relationship that is that triangle. And but the thing is that it rarely works. And there's many reasons why it doesn't work. That can be because consultants don't really like to talk to procurement. I think that's an issue. But to be fair, stakeholders don't really like to involve procurement either, and that's why procurement is often involved at the very last minute when everything is already on the table, and they're here for most of the time issuing the purchase order, and sometimes negotiating while everything else is set. And that's true also that procurement sometimes they come to the relationship with their incentive or savings, and they say, hey, we're going to save money, and they forget that we're not about buying, we're about finding a solution to a problem. And sometimes there's the importance of making the saving is much less than the importance of delivering the project and the value that it can bring. So that's also something that is not working in that system. And also something that we see is that people that are in procurement and in charge of consulting are often not at the same level than the stakeholders. It's really hard when you are a junior procurement person in charge of consulting and your stakeholders, they are the VP strategy or they're the COO. Or how do you get to them and say, hey, we need to talk. I have things to discuss with you. This is really hard. And so that makes the relationship that is not fair and it's not really working. But if that relationship, that triangle relationship is working, then there's value for everyone. That's very important. But there's one thing to be said though, is that consultants, even though they have expertise and so on, they are subcontractors. So they will follow the lead of their stakeholders, of their clients. So the people that really have in their hands the power to change that dynamic in the relationship, they are the stakeholders, and in a lesser way, procurement. They're the ones who can set the tone and set the direction for the relationship. Laurent, Mark, you wanted to add something?
I think you said it all when you said that the triangle rarely works, and that's very often procurement comes at the last minute, and as per the late involvement does not deliver the value it could deliver. And it's kind of everybody is to blame for this relationship not working, and everybody has to kind of contribute if we want this to be better. In the same way that it is great if the procurement folks know the partners of the consulting firms and are able to say who is good at what, so that we use the right partner on the right project. That's the only source of truth you can get.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. I think that, frankly, procurement is not the right vehicle for hiring consultants. It should be HR. And so as you think about procurement, their whole reason for being is to try to reduce costs, not necessarily add growth, add value, work on culture, or work on all the things consultants do. And so I've never seen an RFP where when we won an RFP, I've never actually seen a case where the work that we performed matched the scope of the RFP very well. And so, and the reason for that is procurement is trying to buy within, and generally, if you knew the answer to what exactly you needed, you would be hiring a consultant to begin with. You're hiring them for their expertise. And so that it plays out in a way where you need to win over procurement, but the stakeholder needs to have the power over procurement, or else probably
so I think that comes from probably the positioning of consulting that is more in the transactional work. But in procurement those days, a lot of companies are trying to move them from a transactional role to a more strategic role, and in that case, they need to be involved and they need to understand what work should be done. But I think you're right. To your point, it's that it's complicated to understand how consulting works and to articulate the needs of your client in an RFP that stays at the scope as how it can create most value for the company, as opposed to make savings or again, you're not buying a service, you're buying a solution to a problem, and that's something that is often forgotten, or maybe that's because they don't have the keys to do it right. I wanted to just wait a couple of seconds. Don't hesitate if you have questions to ask them. On the left hand, you have a question section. Don't hesitate to ask your question on the fly. We'll try our best to answer them while they arise. Okay. All right. So moving on to the next question. Many companies rely on stakeholders to sustain these relationships. How can this influence the consulting engagement, and what challenges might companies face if they lean too heavily on stakeholders for relationship management? Yeah, Mark, go ahead. Sorry.
To define my stakeholders. Oh, sorry. The question was for Mark. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay. So, yeah, so the stakeholders, frankly, are the ones who should be sustaining the relationships, because they're the ones who have the most to gain from the relationships. They're on the ground. They understand what the challenges are and what the needs are that they're engaging the stakeholders, engaging the consultants for. So yeah, I'll say again, procurement as a stranger, the buyer needs to be very connected to the stakeholder, or else they really aren't going to have the context they need to be able to make those buying decisions, as we call it buying. So if you lean too heavily, though, on the stakeholders, you may end up in a situation where the stakeholder is myopic, meaning that they don't see across the different consulting providers that they could be engaging to help. And so where the buyers can really help is bringing new consultants into the mix and introducing them to the stakeholders, so that those stakeholders are aware of the possibilities that they maybe didn't know existed. And because consulting is ever changing, and every firm has a different niche and a different expertise. And so it's a great idea to have the buyers, procurement, do capabilities presentations for various stakeholders within organizations, so they can, in a sense, understand when to bring them in various situations, various use
Laurent, you
cases,
wanted to add something to what Mark said?
I wanted to understand better the definition of stakeholders.
I think that the term of stakeholders, as opposed to procurement, it's the people within the organization that are buying consulting. Yeah, that's internal stakeholders, indeed. Yeah.
Okay, the operationals. Okay.
So what I would add to that is that I think that you have a great point, Mark, in saying that the relationship cannot be only procurement, and it cannot be only stakeholders. The ideal is to have that both relationship, one that is from the client to the stakeholder, from the consultant to the stakeholder, so they can build a trust, and that's how you can deliver the project. But you also need that relationship between the consultant and procurement, so they can bring some new blood. They can do the onboarding. There are many things that they can bring to the table, and the risks you're taking are multiple. And I think that indeed the lack of variety, if you rely only on one stakeholder, but also there's a risk attached to the relation, as I mentioned before, that when you are only relying on a stakeholder, if that person leaves the company, then the connection is lost, and it's going to be hard to get back on track to build that relationship with the partner that you didn't know, or maybe the new person that will replace the stakeholder that left will not be interested in building that relationship, even though that company,
But yes. The risk is to end up buying based on the relationships, and to end up buying from companies on areas where they don't have the competence. Because you have a good relationship with the partner, you like him, he knows you, you trust him, and you end up asking him to work on something. He does it because he wants to bring some continuity to the relationship, but it's kind of a reach with his expertise, and then nobody wins at the end, because you get a half-baked project, and then everybody's frustrated. The other thing is that you risk to buy several times the same project.
You have a scattered spend. Everybody is buying their own corner, and you have no overview of what's happening, and you have no overview of the potential synergies between the different projects, or or and you cannot anticipate either what is going to happen in the next like 3 to 6 months. So you cannot offer alternatives, as Mark was saying, if you rely only on stakeholders and consultants.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've seen that happen many times, by the way. We get asked to do additional services that we kind of do, but they're not our focus. And that happens all the time in consulting because there's so much trust in the relationship that they want to keep working with you. And sometimes you have to say, actually,
that's a very good point, because actually, if you accept a mission on a type of service that you're not the best at, you might take a risk for your company and your reputation. So that's not a good move for the consultant either. I mean, it's a short-term move.
Right.
You also take it. You also take it if you vouch for somebody.
Maybe.
So I would maybe sometimes the best move is to just stay away.
So a list of preferred providers is a go-to to many organizations. What might be the downside of over-dependence on such a list, especially in the light of that triangle relationship dynamic? And does this list adequately address the needs and expectation of the three corners of that triangle?
So maybe the simplest way to answer to this is to share an example. When I joined Solvay, I was running the strategy for one of the business units. We had basically 3 suppliers for management consulting. We were using McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, and Roland Berger. And they knew that they would get a piece of the business, not every time, but I would say 30% of the time or 25% of the time, they knew that they would get it. And it's better if you know a little bit the consulting economics to sell well one project every 4 projects than to sell poorly one project every 4 projects. I mean, you don't really need to know the economics to understand the difference between the two. In one case, you sell well. In the other case, you don't sell well. And you win a project every 3 to 4 times anyway. So this was not placing a lot of pressure on pricing. And then everything was always coming back at $800 kilo or $1 million. And they were all aligned in the pricing because they had understood how this was working. And this was one of the reasons we created Consulting Quest, by the way, because I did not have enough budget to afford all the things I wanted to do. And I needed to find alternative companies. But I would say that the dependence on the list is that sometimes the list can backfire. If the list is too small, then you create inadvertently an oligopoly. And then you have the drawbacks associated with it.
Go ahead.
Yeah. And I'll say, from a consulting perspective, we see all the time that you have go-to consulting firms.
That's a good point.
The list should really be go-to consultants, not firms, because you're building relationships with individuals at these firms, and sometimes they move locations. Sometimes the list is outdated. Sometimes you're not giving certain. You think you're hiring a firm because of prior experience, and they bring in a new team, and that team is a completely different skill set, not completely, but somewhat different skill set or experience you were working with prior. So
that's a very good point. Consulting,
you got to
skills it relies heavily on the people, and usually, ideally, when you have a list of preferred providers and you have a company that is crossing several segments of your list of preferred providers, you should have different partners, because the partner in charge of strategy will not be the same than the one that is in charge of operation excellence, even if they work for the same company, because that's not the same work. That's not the same skills that are and the same knowledge behind it. And I think that's probably the most important problem with those list of preferred suppliers that are based on when one company is present in all the segments, is that usually it's only one partner that is the relationship partner, and that person cannot be good at everything. That's not true. You cannot be good at everything, and
Right.
And also, building on what you're saying, one of the drawbacks, and I don't know if we'll touch base on this later on, is that most of the companies don't know what consulting firms actually can do. They know them for something they have done, and they have placed them in a box, and it is what it is. And and that's where the triangle could be helpful as well, is to make sure that there is an up-to-date presentation of the company, that sometimes there is a refresh on what are the services that could be used, because most of the companies know the consulting firms for one project they have done in the past, which will probably not repeat for another 3 to 5 years, and they don't really know what are the other capabilities.
Yes. Okay.
So, before we move on, Hélène, maybe you want to show the results of the poll?
No. It's here. So the poll was: how would you rate the effectiveness of this triangle operations procurement consultant for your company? So only one say that it's working like a charm. Two say I don't know what you're talking about. And one say we tried, but it's not working well. I think it reflects a lot what we've heard from our clients, to be honest. So that's that. Yes, indeed, this is an issue, and it's not working that well, and we need to find ways to make it work. So now we're going to talk about the consulting perspective. So that's funny. You started your answer like that, Mark, just a few minutes ago. So let's start with the first question. That is for you, actually. When you're embarking on a project with a client, what are the key aspects that you as a consultant value most in the relationship? And how can client organization ensure they're creating an environment that meets these expectations and facilitates a successful partnership?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We love when our clients are our partners and they're aligned on their side. So before they engage, they know what success looks like. They know why they do it. And so they've kind of thought through and figured out the relationship they want and what success looks like. That's the best relationship, because it's easy to gauge success and to know exactly where to focus. When there's either multiple stakeholders with different objectives, or there's not complete internally, they end up bringing a consultant sometimes to be a tiebreaker, and that's a politically sensitive place to be. And so, as a consultant, you're put in a difficult position. You're almost a mediator at that point, and we play that role all the time. We're comfortable with it, but it's not as enjoyable, I would say, when you have an aligned team and you're working toward it. So that would certainly be one key aspect that we would value. The other is openness and trust. And I will also say agency. So when I say agency, I've seen many situations where an SVP or a VP is basically bringing a consultant in, but what they really want to do is impress their boss, the C-level. And so you're there to make them look good, not to solve the problem. And that is something that can be corrosive to the effectiveness of the project. And so it's much better if they have the ability to feel comfortable here in making decisions without having to feel like they're doing it for reasons that really are.
And I think that your point on how it's important to put the consultant in a position where he doesn't have to struggle with the different stakeholders and can move forward with the project, that's where you can bring the value. But sometimes, as you were mentioning, the role of the consultant is to bring everybody together. But that's another type of project, indeed. So procurement professionals often serve as the bridge between the consultant and the organization. How can procurement teams play a proactive role in nurturing this relationship and ensuring they remain productive and beneficial for both sides? So that's a very interesting question. The first part is that procurement are a role to play in an onboarding. the consultants and making sure that they're not facing any issues or they have access and resources and information to work effectively. And that's a very important point. Another point also is ensuring that you have fairness and transparency in the relationships, and that's also something that procurement can bring to the table, and also facilitate the relationship. All projects don't go well, and sometimes there's an issue with the client for many reasons, and that comes from the lack of alignment between the different stakeholders and among them and the consultants here in the middle. And he cannot be, or they cannot be, the referee. So, you know, there might be a place for a role as a facilitator or mitigator or referee, whatever you want to call it, to make sure that things happen correctly and according to the contract, because at the end of the day, they start. The other thing also is that giving some visibility to the consultants on what's next. I think that a lot of companies are a little bit shy to share what they want to do next, what visibility they can give to a given consulting firm, and how they could work with them in the future or not, actually. And I think it's about transparency and be also very open to say, okay, we are in need of skills like yours, and we will work more in the future, or actually this is a one-time project, so we're very happy to work with you this time, but there's very little change that will work in the future. I think that consultants will really appreciate being clear on that, and because that's also give them the right level of expectations on the project in the future. And the cherry on cake is that when you give consultants some visibility on the future, and you give them, you make them see the opportunities that they can get, they'll be much more willing to offer interesting prices, competitive pricing, if they see that there's opportunities, than if they don't. And why? Not because they want to sell you stuff, not only, but also because, you know, when you sell consulting, you're selling time. And so if you know that for the next 6 months or for the next 8 months, you have projects coming through, and you don't have to go out and sell your services that much, and you can plan for the next in your pipeline, then that will like mechanically lower the price a little bit, and you at least you have a little bit more margin that you can play with. And so it's not only about being, you know, fair and being very friendly and etc. It's also about very practical and pragmatic things and benefits that you can have from enhance a better relationship with your suppliers. And yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, that's okay. Go.
Yeah, that's a great point. Sorry, Helene, didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to agree with you. We see a lot that, you know, a lot of times our clients will bring us on, and they don't want to have a consultant who's there indefinitely, and so they try to make it very clear what the scope is and try to limit it as much as possible. But if they were thinking holistically about where the project is going, where the engagement is going, they'd probably get a better deal from the consultants, because they would understand. Yes. Those consultants would understand.
Yeah, and also I think that procurement is an ideal position because there are the crossings of the different stakeholders. We said that a lot of organizations are siloed. That's the way they do. Some are very decentralized, and so every stakeholder cannot have a view on what's happening in the next department or the next business unit or the next group. So there needs to be a focal point, and that focal point, if they have that view of what's happening in the company. That's where they can bring visibility. They can bring also consolidate the feedback for the consultant and so on. So that's being at the crossing of everything and be able to interact with the consultants, not on one project, but on many projects, and on one relationship, but many relationships within the company. And I think that's also something that procurement can really bring value to, because they're ideally positioned for that. So strong relationship with consulting suppliers are paramount for the success of any engagement. From your experiences, what are some of the common mistakes or oversights companies commit when managing their relationship, and how can they better be addressed or avoided? Yeah.
So I guess I'll go first. One common mistake I see is not looking under the hood. Whenever I hire a consultant, meaning, for another purpose, something that's not in our field of expertise, I don't stop at the capabilities presentation, the experience. What I try to do is understand their real expertise, and I like to talk with their former clients and understand exactly how they added value. Usually what consultants do cannot be quantified with specific ROI. So you're not going to usually get something like that unless it's a rare operational savings consultant relationship. But for the vast majority, it's much more qualitative. And you'll want to hear things like, they helped me move more quickly. They opened up doors for me. They helped me make tough decisions. They brought new thoughts into our team's mind that we didn't think of before. They aligned our team. We were misaligned. Those types of feedback are key, and you won't get that typically from an
you wanted to add something as well?
I think one of the key mistakes that should be addressed is that sometimes you're not happy with the relationship, or you're not happy with the delivery, or you're not happy with one of the partners. It doesn't mean that you're not happy with the company. It just means that the relationship, there is no fit between some individuals, and this has to be addressed as well. It's better to say something rather than to let the relationship progressively degrade. The thing is, most companies should measure the performance. Maybe I'm making a segue with the next section, but most companies should measure the performance and the strengths of the relationship, and they should identify the weak signals, and maybe sometimes change the partners that are managing the relationship in order to salvage the relationship and start on a new, fresh basis. And they don't do it. And when they don't, then the relationship fades, and then it takes years to come back into the account.
Yeah. One other thing I'll mention on that is they don't always think through. Once there's inertia and you have a consultant in the fold, sometimes they don't think, maybe I should be training my team, bringing this in.
So let's move on to managing a list of preferred suppliers. So creating lists of preferred suppliers, that's a common practice in procurement. And is it beneficial for consulting, and what potential strength does this approach offer to companies? The benefits are very similar to what you find with other categories. The first thing is about you can pre-negotiate your costs. You can negotiate MSAs with your preferred suppliers. They are privated, meaning that they're already onboarded, and because they're onboarded already, then you can cut a little bit corners on the process and go. It's going to be faster to engage them, and you can focus on the SOW instead of negotiating all the terms and all the conditions that are attached to that. So that's all of this in terms of process. This is very interesting. The other thing is that it's interesting because you can manage the tail. You can avoid having tons and tons and tons of suppliers for small projects. If you have a list of preferred suppliers, you can focus your stakeholders onto a defined list of suppliers. So these are benefits that are true for consulting. One other thing that is very important, and that's more specific to consulting, that's the intimacy. That you're building the intimacy with your suppliers and your consulting suppliers. And we said before that there is value in working with consultants that know you. And because they'll be plug and play in a way. That means that you don't need to onboard them. You don't need to tell them everything that has happened and all the stories about your company and everything you've done in that given area, because they've worked with you in the past and they know your culture, they know your organization, they know the who is who in your company. So there's that value for a list of preferred suppliers, and that's pretty much everything else is pretty much the same than any other category. So now, well, let's talk about the pitfalls that comes with having that list of preferred providers. What are the primary concerns and drawbacks that organization might face when they rely heavily on a fixed list of preferred providers? So that's a very important thing, and that's particularly true in consulting. Even though there are advantages in having a list of preferred providers, there are many drawbacks. The first one, I'd say, is the lack of adaptability of your list. Well, meaning that if you rely on a given number of suppliers, then you cut yourself from everything else. And you cut yourself from adapting your list of suppliers to your needs. It's really hard to anticipate the needs in consulting, and it's really hard to make it in a way where you're not taking a wide brush and saying, "Oh, I'm going to work with the Big Four. I'm going to work with MBB, and they'll do it all for me." That's not true. All consulting firms are not equal. They're not interchangeable. Small consultancies have a huge value to bring to the equation that is very often linked to in-depth expertise and seniority in the field, and more agile also approach to problems, a more customized approach to problems. So there is value in working with many types of consulting firms based on what really is your need and what expertise you're looking for. And when you have a list of preferred suppliers, you can see several pitfalls. First one is you made your segment so wide, and since one of the other elements when you're building a list of preferred suppliers is to limit the number of suppliers per segment. If your segments are too wide and your numbers are too low, then who are the only ones that can fit the bill? The big players. So it's cutting out everybody that is not in the top 10 of consulting firms. And while that might seem like a good idea, we don't have that many suppliers. As you probably know, those guys come with premium prices. So all the saving that you might have done in having less suppliers to handle are lost because you're paying higher prices. So that's one thing. The second thing is that when you do that, when you're really focusing on a very limited list of suppliers, then you rely on like 2 or 3 consulting firms. It means that it's always the same methodologies, it's always the same people, and it's always the same ideas and perspectives. But as Mark said before, consulting is an ever-changing industry, and there are many innovative companies that are bringing new approaches, new methodologies, new expertise, and you might not, cut yourself from that. And so the pitfall is that it's really hard to build a list of preferred providers in consulting that covers 80% of your needs, because it's really hard to anticipate your needs. It's really hard to diversify your panel while limiting yourself to a given number of suppliers in a given category. All of this make it hard. Yeah? Yeah.
I think, Hélène, the term preferred supplier list could be really understood literally. They are the preferred suppliers, but they are not the sole suppliers.
Yes.
And the issue is that very often the preferred supplier list becomes the unique supplier list, and then
Well,
you don't have the
it's true.
flexibility
It's true.
anymore,
And
and you're
often
stuck,
what we
and
say
you have
is
created
that
your own trouble.
even your preferred
That's right.
suppliers, you cut them into pieces. You have your strategic suppliers that are usually the ones that have strategic value for you. And a lot of companies understand that that's where I spend the most. No, that's not where you spend the most. That's the one that brings the most value to you. And that can be a small consulting firm with a very unique skill, but you need them absolutely. Then they become strategic for you. You need them. They become a strategic supplier. So the problem is about really how you can handle the relationship. The list of preferred providers should be the list of suppliers that you want to engage a long-term relationship with, because you know that on the long run, you will need to work with them. That should be your list of preferred providers. But then you could have on the side a list of pre-fitted suppliers that you know that you have onboarded, at least partially, that have skills that are interested for you, but when you might not have that closer relationship with them because you don't know when you will need them. So it's kind of a different approach than what you might have in other categories.
Yeah, the word list there is also doing a lot of work, because you could have everything from a list of firms to a list of projects, and which firm helped on which project and which person at that firm, and how defined you want to get on all of that is critical, because you may have a list of preferred suppliers, but you may put them under a big bucket, strategy consultants, but that's just too broad.
Yes.
There's so much different. There's so many different types and nuances to what consultants do that it's really difficult to have a list.
Yeah, it's
really
more. It should be more
a detailed list, or else it wouldn't
a list of what they can do, and you focus on those of the suppliers again that you want to build a long-term relationship with, because you know you work with them and you need them. I think that's the focus. What the focus should be about in there. So most companies confess not being fully aware of the range of services their current providers can provide. We discussed that a little bit with you, Laurent. Providers tend to be put in a box based on what they have done well in the past with the company. Do you have the same perception, and how to overcome this situation without being perceived as too aggressive commercially? I think that question comes from a consultant. I don't know why.
I'll answer that. The answer is definitely yes. I have that perception. We tend to get put in a box. That's just the way people's minds work. The way to overcome that is to mention in conversation some of the other things you've done. Make sure that you're, as a consultant and as a client, make sure that there's conversations happening at multiple levels, not just client team with consulting team. It's also going up and over, and you have relationship manager with C-level executive or senior executive, so that there's conversation happening throughout the organization. And really, I do this a lot. I know most consultants do. You end up learning things just through casual conversation, and being consultants is who we are. We like to solve. And so I can bring up a prior example of a project that I worked on that related to something based on a conversation scope to what we were.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Is that you need to grab the straws that you can to introduce your services. But I think that's typically the kind of thing that procurement could bring value to, and saying, receiving those consulting firms that are preferred or on the list and say, hey, we haven't talked in the last year. Could you come back and present your services? And did that evolve in the last year? Because again, that can evolve. That's the beauty of it. It's not because you do this 3 years ago. That's the only scope that you have. You might have changed. You might have hired a partner that has new skills. Things can change very quickly in consulting. And actually, that's the idea: is that the business environment is evolving quickly, and an organization, how can they ensure that their panel remains adaptive and dynamically aligned with their changing needs and objective? And what strategy can be employed to keep it fresh and responsive? Yeah. So I think that we can very quickly
I think I jumped the gun on that one a few
right?
minutes ago. I'll try to be. Yeah. If you are really rigid about having a panel and sticking to it, the solution is probably to have a larger panel. Otherwise, and then to collect the needs in advance, to anticipate during the budget period, what are the needs for next year? Does that fit the capabilities that you have in place? Are the guys that have those capabilities good in the performance ratings? And maybe onboard relevant providers. And the one thing I would suggest is maybe to kind of keep a list of challenges that you don't necessarily onboard in your systems, but that are ready to go for an RFP. And then if they end up winning the RFP, then you will have to onboard them in a fast track. But that's the way I would do things. Try to have a list, but then keep some flexibility on the side.
To do, right? So we're talking about managing the performance very quickly. Performance management is vital for any supplier relationship. What is it critical for consulting suppliers, and how does that mesh with that concept of maintaining a preferred supplier list? So that's a very good point. I think that the measuring performance is super important for consulting, because that's how you can ensure that the value is delivered. And it's very surprising how it's the only industry almost where we don't measure the results and we don't measure value, even though as consultants we push our clients to measure the value of whatever they're working on. So that's a very important to make sure that yes, the value was delivered as expected. The other thing that is important as well is the value for money, because value is one thing, but then is it the right value for money? Am I happy compared to what I've paid? Was it worth it to work with that consultant in that regard? And also another element is risk management. When you are proactively measuring the quality, you can assess when a consulting firm the relationship with a consulting firm is degrading, when their performance is degrading because there are people who left, or because whatever the reasons can be. And if you don't measure, how do you know until it's too late, right? So that's one of the things. And then how does that link to managing a supplier list? So measuring the performance, it's a wonderful tool to build a relationship with your suppliers on as objective as possible element. It's the feedback from the different stakeholders can help you build that intimacy with the suppliers. Sometimes it's not about telling them you're wrong, I want you out. Sometimes it's to tell them, look, we love working with you, but we have that issue. How can we work together to make it work? And it's just like with other categories where we build improvement plans when we have an issue. That should be the same with your preferred suppliers, the ones that you need and you want to continue working with. And that's also something that is particularly vital. So I would say that, like, really having feedback that is constructive and based on as objective as possible points that are based on projects and that are based on people, right, and partners, because all partners are different. And that's how you can really, build that relationship with them and build that preferred supplier list that works.
And most of the consultants will tell you that you need to measure if you want to improve. But then they don't apply this recipe to themselves.
They're very, very happy.
Very true.
Because they don't often have one. So that's the paradox.
I've seen many tries in my life as a consultant where we are trying to get feedback from the clients, but we didn't know who should ask, because if it's the partner that is asking, then he's asking for himself and it might be biased. Then we said, okay, let's have the the questions asked by another partner, but the other partner doesn't want to be in trouble with his colleague, so then it's biased again.
So this is for you because you've been on both sides of the consulting spectrum. You sold and you bought consulting. How would you recommend companies best approach the management of consulting performance, and what key metrics of KPI should they prioritize, and how to align the interest of both parties?
I think we should measure the performance at least at the end of a project. At least at the end. Mark, you were about to say something. Please jump in.
Yeah, sure. I'll just quickly say, agree with you. End of the project. I'll agree with what you said earlier. They'll tend to grade on a curve because they don't want to make themselves look bad because they chose you as a consultant. So I would suggest doing it on a blind basis, so that there's a survey of some form or a third party does it, that they're not subjective.
Or a digital solution, having something that removes the relationship. For once, we want to remove the relationship dimension into the process.
So I think that, again, taking out the personal relationship out of the equation.
Yeah. Okay. And you need to look at the feedback from the sponsor, the feedback from the project leader, and the feedback from the people that participated on the project. Because the guy that is at the receiving end of a restructuring project might have a totally different perspective on the performance as the guy that actually ordered it. And that's something that's sometimes you hear a lot of kind of bad noise about consultants, but they are kind of working on the project they are asked to work on, and the sponsor might be happy with it. In terms of dimensions, you were asking about that in your question, Hélène. I think when you look at the various dimensions, from how was the commercial part, was the team with the appropriate expertise, was the team senior enough, was the team what we were expecting? Because when we saw the partners at the beginning, then we got the school bus, we were not that happy. Was the delivery according to plan, on time, in quality? Was the behavior and the fit good? Was there knowledge transferred? Was the transition smooth? And at the end of the day, was there the impact we were expecting? I think those are the key elements we really want to look at. If you want to summarize that, you could also use the old good net promoter score. At the end of an assignment, that would give you an answer in kind of a 10-second answer. But if you want to look at more dimensions,
I think we're almost done. So
I'm looking at the time,
Hélène.
I don't know
how steps should company take? I think that we answered that, and be very quick on that. You have your results. So there's two ways to use them. One is the postmortem analysis. Once you've finished your project, you can meet the consulting firm with the stakeholders and provide that feedback from that given project. This is what was great. This is what was not that great. And this is how you could do things better in the future. And that is regardless of the status of the supplier. If it's on your preferred supplier list or not, doesn't matter. It's just for them, continuous improvement. It's very important to get some feedback sometimes, because that's not that often. And then there's another instance where, and that's only for preferred providers, where annually or 2 times a year or whatever, it really depends on the type of suppliers and the volume that they're handling, is to have some meetings to review several things that are indeed performance related. That can be a part of the conversation, but the other part of the conversation could be also about the adequacy between what box you put them in and what they can really deliver based on the results of the performance. With that, what I mean by that is that they might be much better in strategy than in operations, and then you want to keep them for strategy, and for operations you might move them out of the box for things like that. You can also think about renegotiating some MSA terms of everything. But those performance results are really a good start. And then there's also everything about improvement plans. It's so easy to say you're not good, get out. And actually you don't do that. Instead of waiting for just not taking them in for next project because you think that they're not that good, why not trying to understand why they're not that good? Is it structural? Is it really because the approach is not great? Or is it just a person? Is it just the relationship partner that is not doesn't have a good fit, or that has issues, or that has not the right skills. I mean, it's important to look at that in order to build those long-term relationships. That cannot be a one-way street. You also have to give them a chance to improve and get better and have better results on the next project. So that's how you can use those results. So just a final thought, like we are concluding. If we were to say what are the key ingredients very, very quickly, and let's try to do that in like one sentence. What are the key ingredients for a successful relationship? Laurent, on the company side, what would you say is the key ingredient?
It's going to be a long sentence. The first part of the sentence is that we need to recognize that consulting is a category in itself and manage it as a category. So it means managing the panel, managing the performance, make sure that there is competition, and then make sure that you have a point person to talk to on the consulting side. Be fair, be transparent. You need to provide feedback and identify ways to improve. There has to be some continuity, but not on all the projects. Make sure that you use the best company for a given project and not necessarily the company you like. The company you like is not necessarily the company you need. And then there is something on the relationship, which is that you can always look at if there is a way to find some alignment on the value that is being created. It does not apply to all projects, but if you have a way to have skin in the game for the consultant and the client, so that they are all pulling in the same direction, that's the best way to align the interest and keep everyone happy.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly say, consultants are not product. They're services. They're people. So when engaging a consultant or firm, make sure that you think of them that way. That's why I started off this conversation talking about HR. You need to think of them the same way as it's not as long of a relationship. There's less, liability, whatever you want to call it. But a lot of the same aspects apply when you're hiring time as when you hire a consultant. No, the other thing I'll say is alignment and clarity.
I think that's a very good point, is that you need to be clear on your expectations so you can articulate them and communicate them to the consultants. We always say we need the consultants to understand what we expect, but sometimes we don't know what we expect really, or we don't agree as a team on what we expect. And we've seen that in a project, right, Laurent, in a high-tech company. That was a very interesting project. But moving on, that's the end of this webinar. Thank you everyone for being there. Thank you, Mark, for sharing your experience and your insights on the relationship with consulting suppliers. I think that what we can say here is that collaboration, openness, and transparency are the keywords that we need to remember, and that it's a three-way relationship. But the people really can set the directions are the clients, and then procurement, and finally consultants, who are here to bring their expertise, but they're not driving. They're not in the driving seat. And I think that would be the end word for that conversation. We have another webinar coming up in 2 months. It's investing in the right project. So here we're moving up, saying how should we allocate our resources, and what project will advance our strategy faster or accelerate our transformation. Of course, we're going to talk about demand management. We're going to talk about make or buy, but we'll also talk about consulting strategy, or how can we use consulting as a strategic lever for our organization. So be sure to tune in. Thank you all. Have a very good end of your day, and I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.